If you pay attention to MMA in the UK and Ireland in any kind of way, whether you watch some of the promotions, whether you follow them on social media, or whether you just listen to some of the people that talk about it a lot, I am sure that you have heard the name Paul Hughes in the last year or so, probably specifically mentioning why he hasn't been signed to the UFC. The point of this video is to talk about Paul Hughes, who he is, why there's hype around him, where he's at right now in his career, and all of those things, because I'm sure there will be people who know the name but maybe don't know why people are so high on him or what he's done in his career and all that good stuff. And I will explain why this video is specifically relevant at this time as we go on. So let's talk about where the hype comes from with Paul Hughes. And to really talk about his career, you've got to talk about Cage Warriors, where he has been for the majority of his pro career. Paul Hughes had some impressive fights early on in his career, moving up the featherweight rankings in Cage Warriors. But really, it's the 5-fight win streak that he is currently on that we can really kind of I say 5-fight win streak. I think it's just a 5-fight streak because, well, I don't want to give anything away, so let's track back a little bit. I'm sure a lot of people will know about Cage Warriors. It produces a ton of European talent that goes on to the UFC primarily, as well as some other promotions, but mostly they have been a feeder promotion for the UFC. It's kind of the most proven path to go through if you want to make it to the UFC and you are a European fighter. The featherweight division alone, which is where Paul Hughes fights, or did fight, again, more on that later, has had the likes of Mads Burnell go through it and become champion. Paddy Pimblett, of course. Conor McGregor, of course. All of these guys. Cage Warriors is very significant for Paul Hughes' career and the hype around him because of the level of competition he's faced. As I mentioned, the last 5 fights of his career, particularly where it's picked up, and it actually starts with a loss to Jordan Vucenic, a split decision in one of the closest fights I have ever seen in Cage Warriors. I've watched that fight multiple times, and I still don't know how you score it for either man. It is so difficult. And immediately everyone was like, we need to see a rematch because it was super close. And it didn't happen for the time being. Instead, Paul Hughes went on to fight some other opponents, and this is where it comes into why he hasn't been signed to the UFC. Now, Paul Hughes did have multiple offers to sign for the UFC, not directly. It was Contender Series and The Ultimate Fighter, and like I said, you can go check out some interviews with him that he did recently, where he kind of elaborates on that a little bit more and why he chose not to do those things. But the reason that was given by Graham Boylan, who is the president of Cage Warriors, as to why Hughes probably hasn't been signed yet, is his run of decision wins. The UFC want finishers, everybody knows that. If you watch Contender Series, you know that very well. But Paul Hughes' last 3 wins, excluding his last fight, but I'll explain why I'm kind of skating around the last fight in a little bit, because it's the final thing we're going to talk about. But he had 3 decision wins in a row. The only decision wins on his record, I might add, a 10-1 record, and most of them are finishes. Those 3 decision wins came against 3 top guys in Cage Warriors. The first of which being against James Hendon, who is a top contender in the division. He's fought for the belt in the past, and he recently secured a win over Tobias Harila, which could earn him a second title shot at that belt. The second win coming over Morgan Charrier, who, if you follow the UFC a lot, then you will know he debuted in Paris just a couple weeks, maybe what was it, a month and a half ago, something like that. The Cyril Gane versus Sergey Spivak card. Not that it matters, but Morgan Charrier was one of the highlights of that entire event. He made his UFC debut. He got a first round finish. It was incredible stuff. Everyone has known Charrier has been UFC caliber for a long time. And Paul Hughes beat him in, I believe, a fight that won Fight Pass Fight of the Year. It was an incredible fight that went to a decision because both guys were incredibly high level. And then the real peak of it was Paul Hughes rematching Jordan Vucenic for the title. He beat Vucenic, another decision win, but probably about as dominant as you can get for a decision win. Like, I don't know. That fight would have been finished if it wasn't for the fact that Vucenic is also on a UFC caliber and he's incredibly tough, because I don't know how he survived that fight. I think that fight will go down as one of the most impressive performances in Cage Warriors. It's definitely up there for me, probably top 5. It's definitely the best one I've seen in quite some time. especially considering how close their first fight was. So for Hughes to just dominate the second fight in the way that he did was unbelievable to watch, and a UFC caliber fight happening on Cage Warriors, and not only that, but an incredible performance at that. So then let's get to why we're talking about this now, because I could have told you about Paul Hughes a year and a half ago when he beat Morgan Charrier. Like, after the Vucenic split decision, their first fight, it was clear that both these guys are on a crazy high level. And every fight, Paul Hughes has just impressed more and more each time. The reason I'm saying this now is because Paul Hughes returned at the weekend. He came back to Cage Warriors. It had been almost a year since we last saw him in that fight with Vucenic, the rematch. And a lot of people did not think he would ever fight in Cage Warriors again. But he did. He came back last weekend in Ireland, moving up to the lightweight division, so vacating the featherweight title, which a lot of people had wondered what was going to happen with that because he hadn't fought in a year. So he did vacate the title, he's moved up to lightweight, and he took on Jan K. Hagens in Ireland. And a lot of people, it would be safe to kind of imagine that Paul Hughes would have maybe a tune-up fight, a ticking over fight, because the UFC call-up seemed a given at this point, and so you don't want to risk that. But no, Yankee Hagens came into the fight, 5-fight win streak, all finishes, a very tough guy. They said that this would be a #1 contender match for the belt, for the title shot. I mean, not the belt itself, because that's currently held by George Hardwick. And Paul Hughes delivered one of those performances where you go, yeah, this guy is on a UFC caliber, which we all knew, but he ticked every box. Not only did he make it look like a tune-up fight, he delivered the finish. A knockout in the first round, a perfect left hook as his opponent came into range that span Key Hagens' head round. It was a beautiful shot, a beautiful finish, and a hell of a statement when you want to say that the only reason he hasn't been signed is because of those decision wins. And everyone was saying, yeah, but those decision wins are against guys at a UFC caliber. And that's all well and good, but the finishes is what speaks to the UFC the most. And when you deliver a knockout like that, says it all. That is why there has been hype around Paul Hughes, and that is why everyone has been wondering why he hasn't been signed to the UFC, because you look at the opponents that he's beaten, and I mean, he beat Charrier, and Charrier's in the UFC, you know? He beat Vucenic. A lot of people think Vucenic should be in the UFC. I think he probably will be within the next year. I would urge you, if you haven't watched Paul Hughes fight, to go on UFC Fight Pass, fire up his Fight of the Year contender with Morgan Charrier, his rematch with Vucenic, or this finish over Key Hagens, and you will get it. That's the thing with Paul Hughes, is there's hype, but then he's beaten legit guys in impressive fashion, in a good promotion, and so it's like, there's hype, but there's hype for a reason. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about Hughes and how far he could compete with the top guys in the UFC already. I think that, is there a chance that he fights again in Cage Warriors, maybe for that lightweight belt? Maybe. Is it a waste of everyone's time, mostly Hughes's? I think so. I don't think he has anything else to learn from being in Cage Warriors, and I would love to see him get that UFC call-up. So that is kind of the overall picture. If you've been hearing the name Paul Hughes, now you know why you've been hearing the name Paul Hughes, and I'm sure you will hear it a lot more going into the future, because the ceiling for this guy is massive, and I'm so excited to see him finally get a UFC debut and all of that stuff, and hopefully it happens in the near future so that we don't have to keep asking, why is Paul Hughes not in the UFC? I think that the performance against Key Hagens left no doubt as to the fact that he belongs there, and it was the perfect statement that he needed to make everybody realise that. Let me know in the comments if you're new to Paul Hughes, if you didn't know about him before, if you've never seen him fight, if you go and check out his fights. What do you think of Paul Hughes? How far up the UFC ladder do you think he could go straight from the off? Because I can see him putting wins together in the UFC without a setback, to be honest. I think he will go fairly high up before tasting a defeat. I would say maybe top 30 in the division is where I'd start to place him, like, immediately, but you know, we'll see. Styles make fights, all that stuff, you never know. But yeah, exciting stuff. Thank you for checking out this video, and I will catch you on the next one.
Let's go, my time.